coffee break with me. Come and take your coffee break with me. Come and take your coffee. Come and take your coffee. Come and take your coffee break with me.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Marino with this week's edition of Coffee Break with Candace. And today we are talking about mental health and the very important part about taking care of your mental health. My guest today is Asha Creary, and she is the clinical director for Crave Counseling. Asha, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to have this wonderful conversation with you around mental health.
Yes, it's a very important thing to talk about. And speaking of that, it hasn't always been a topic that is openly spoken about. It's considered sometimes taboo by some, and there's been a stigma that's always been attached to mental health. As of late, though, you've probably seen it in the news as well. There have been many sports figures that have talked about it. You've seen celebrities talk about it. It's even become a conversation in the workplace. Do you think that we are getting to a place in our society where people are more open to speaking about mental health?
I definitely believe so, especially in minority communities. We're starting to have more and more people seek care, not just here in Austin, but just around the world. More and more people are like talking about it and having more conversations about the different types of professions within mental health. So I definitely think it's becoming not necessarily a hot topic, but it's definitely becoming something more widely accepted, where the stigma is slowly but surely starting to be diminished.
What is something that you would say to somebody who is looking to get help for a mental illness? How should they go about starting to go down that path?
That's kind of one of those catch-22 situations. Sometimes people don't know why they're seeking mental health services. Sometimes as we reflect on our day and our life, as things start to happen, we sometimes go through this cycle of like, what's wrong with me? I don't know what's wrong with me. And so sometimes people really just don't know like how to label the symptom. And so if you feel like you're struggling with like feelings of sadness, if it's a sadness you're experiencing, it could potentially be something like depression. And so once you identify like what that issue is, then only then can you start to seek care. And so in those situations, you can utilize your employee assistance programs or the health benefits portion of your job and say, hey, I'm seeking some type of therapy. And then some companies offer different opportunities. So sometimes they offer LPCs or LCSWs or just counseling sessions. And then some companies offer life coaching opportunities for their employees to also receive a more or a different modality when it comes to seeking different types of help. And then, so that's one way is through your employer. Another way is using your insurance. So if you have an insurance card or an insurance plan, you can typically just log on your like portal for your insurance and put in your zip code and put in therapy or put in counseling or put in mental health or put in psychology, and the list of providers within that zip code or in that area that you're looking for will pop up and you can kind of connect with them that way. And then, of course, we live in a world filled with technology. So you can also always just research therapists in Round Rock or North Austin or Missouri or New York. And you can go about it that way as well. Or again, on social media, hashtag Dallas Therapist, hashtag Austin Therapist, hashtag therapists, LGBTQ therapists. You know, you can always seek services that best benefit you. So again, you have to identify what it is, figure out how you want to find services, and then reach out to those providers. Not all providers offer consultations. And so it's really important to ask for that, because if you've never been to therapy, you don't necessarily know what you're looking for. And so what the consultation does is it allows the client, one, to hear more about the clinician and what therapy is and what it might look like for them. But then it also allows them to expand on the issues that they may have of concern. And no, it doesn't constitute a counseling session. It's more of an informational thing where the provider and the client get to decide if this might be a great relationship. Because once you jump into the relationship, you don't want it to be where you feel like you've made a mistake. And there are some instances where some clinicians just don't offer it, and that's 100% okay. But if you can, get a consultation with as many therapists as you can so you can get a little bit more experience with doing it, and then make a decision on which provider you would like to go with.
What are some things that you've seen that have prevented people from seeking help for mental illness?
Stigma for sure. Religion, family. Sometimes family will minimize your need for mental health, and they'll say, "Oh, nothing's wrong with you," or things like that. And then another thing is access. A lot of individuals who are seeking mental health providers are looking for clinicians that look like them, or that sound like them, or that can, expand on maybe their cultural upbringing or their background or their socioeconomic status. And so they're looking for providers that kind of, mimic them or look like them. And so there's such a shortage in providers of color throughout the country. And so a lot of people are sitting on 20, 30, 40 people wait lists for clinicians that look like them. A lot of it has to do with that. And then another part of it has to do with finances. Sometimes people cannot afford their copays, or they cannot afford their high deductible insurance plans, which is why I always preach about utilize your EAP or use community resources, where some of the community resources, they may not have clinicians that look like you or that sound like you, but they can write a check for you to go see a provider who's cash only, for you to go and get those services. So
I would imagine it's probably been a busy time for therapists and people in your field, especially coming off of this pandemic that lasted, for over a year, and we're still just getting out of it. I imagine during that time, there were a lot of people reevaluating their lives and probably coming to terms with a lot of things that maybe they hadn't dealt with prior to this situation. Have you seen some of that?
Yeah, so of course, during COVID, there were a lot of parenting conflicts that came up, where most parents aren't spending more than 8 hours directly with their children like the education system has been. Now the parents are serving in that role as a parent, but also as a teacher. And so there was some conflict that was starting to happen there. Same with relationship conflicts with spouses. And then just because some spouses really didn't know their spouse well enough, or they start to learn more and more about their spouse as they sit at home, or they develop new habits, or whatever happened during COVID, in addition to sibling conflict, and new issues that arise when siblings start to spend more time with each other throughout the day at home. So there's definitely been a rise with that, but in addition to like some of the other race-related things that's happened over the duration of COVID.
You touched on some pretty staggering statistics when it comes to suicide and just the cases of mental illness that we see in our country. Can you talk about that a little?
There has definitely been a rise in suicide rates, and it's definitely become one of the leading causes of death for youth. And more kids are starting to take their own lives because they're not able to cope, or because they're getting to a place to where just people aren't noticing the signs of suicide or noticing the signs of depression. But like 1 in 3 adults will experience a mental illness. 1 in 5 will experience a serious mental illness. And so it's just, the numbers just go up every year. But the more we start to highlight and change the conversation around mental health, the more we can definitely help, not necessarily stop, but reduce or minimize those things from happening.
I think that's the thing about, therapy or seeking help, is that it's not just something that you do once or twice. I mean, it's different for everybody, I know, but can you speak to that as well, that it is something that you have to work at, especially if that is just part of who you are?
Yeah. So one of the biggest myths with mental health is that whenever you go see a therapist, the first thing that people say is, "What's wrong with you?" So we'll start there. There's nothing wrong with going to therapy. You can go through therapy whenever you're at the high of your life, and you can go through therapy when you're at the low of your life. And of course, therapy is not something that is meant to cure, right? Like, we're not giving you this pill and saying, this will fix that. Take this, give it about 6 to 8 days and your symptoms should be gone. That's not how therapy works. Therapy provides you with the tools to help reduce or minimize or even cope with some of those symptoms that you may be struggling with. And so if you are a person that have been struggling with anxiety your entire life, you may have never had access to mental health services. You might have just been given medication management, which is also okay, but medication management also definitely works in conjunction with those who are receiving their psychotherapy services. So it could potentially be lifelong, or it could be something that's triggered. Some of us didn't grow up with traumas. We had a healthy childhood. All of our needs were met. And so we become adults and we learn that the world isn't as glittery as it seemed when we were children. And now we have this onset of anxiety because we're not meeting these goals. We're not meeting the expectations, or we're experiencing imposter syndrome, or we're, struggling with our identity or our weight and our diet. And we're starting to establish unhealthy relationships with food. And so you can be healthy today, and then you could be struggling tomorrow. You could be struggling today and you can be healthy tomorrow. Or you can be in a mellow status where you are not struggling, but you're not necessarily at the high, but you're getting to this place of like, I'm at peace, no matter what happens.
Which again goes back to saying mental health, it's a complex issue, and what works for one person may not work for someone else. And everybody has something very different, which I think sometimes that's what makes it hard for some people to understand, maybe in your family, if they've never dealt with somebody who has had a mental illness or really talked about it. I'm sure that you find that to be the case as well, that it's just hard for some family members to know what that is, right?
If you were to sit down with your grandparents and your great grandparents and your great great grandparents, if you have the luxury of having them all here, and you ask them about certain dynamics within the family, or you're asking them, what was your childhood like? Or did you experience this because I do this? I guarantee you will probably find that some of the behaviors and reactions to trauma is somewhere up the line. Not only that, epigenetics and science has now become such a huge forefront of mental health when it comes to minority individuals and how like our trauma is passed down. And then again, the other thing with the parent to fetus transference, if you're expecting and you experience depression, your child is more likely to experience anxiety and depression. And there's just traumas that are happening outside of our physical status. So like your 5 senses that they teach you about as children, it definitely impacts your mental health. Because if, let's say, you were someone who was abusive to me and you used to wear a certain type of cologne, well, anyone who walks past me with that cologne on might trigger me into being anxious, and I might not necessarily know what's happening. But if you sit down and you reflect on like, why did I feel like that when that happened? Your brain just reminded you that's that scent. Like, you used to get abused and that's the scent. So now you're anxious and now you're overwhelmed and now you're panicking and you're struggling. So a lot of times there's so many things that's going on with us and we don't know it because we haven't sat down with someone to help us highlight or provide perspective to why we might be doing some of the things that we're doing.
And that's such a good point, because I didn't even think about that. It is there are things like that trigger people and you may not even know why. What would you say to somebody out there who they are struggling, but as you know, there's a stigma and they maybe feel shame about the idea of reaching out for help or talking to somebody? What advice would you have for that person?
I would, of course, first start by letting them know, like, psychotherapy or therapy or counseling or mental health is meant to be a safe space. And so when you come in, we leave our bias, we leave our judgment, we leave our trauma, we leave our past experiences at the door. So if you're coming in with an experience where you feel like could be shame, and you might be struggling, just be mindful, like this space is for you. In addition to that, therapy is confidential. So I believe our ethics differ than a lot of other professional ethics. So in our ethics, we're not allowed to have dual relationships. Where in some healthcare professions, that's not necessarily the case. Like they can interact with clients in public and da da da. And not saying that we cannot interact with our clients in public, but we cannot establish a dual relationship. So what happens is if I see a client in public, and this is something that we go over within the first session and during our consultations, that we remind clients that if I see you in public, I'm probably not going to speak. And it's not because I don't care about you as a client, and it's not because I don't see you or acknowledge you, but it's to make sure that you feel confident in your space when outside of therapy. And also to help prevent those difficult conversations with the people you might be with. Because, you know, when you're out with friends and you randomly run into this random lady or this random gentleman, everybody kind of wants to know, who is that person? And so if I'm your therapist and I run into you in public, I won't even speak. I'll walk right past you as if you don't exist. And so I always just kind of let them understand or share that with them so that they can understand how the dynamic works. Like therapy is here. You know, we have psychotherapy notes, which are public notes, and then we have private notes. And so not everything is going to go in the public note, if that makes sense. So there's so many like little things that help protect our clients. So we kind of have a patient-client privilege as well when it comes to legal matters. So we do have the ability to protect, I mean, not saying that we're out here to protect clients per se in certain instances, but we do have the ability to use our judgment in how we interact with our clients in a variety of arenas of things. So,
you know, I mentioned earlier that you're seeing this discussion happening more even in the workplace. But do you think that that conversation, especially when it comes to the workplace, is happening more openly there too, because it's being recognized as an issue that can get in the way of your work life?
Yes, I believe so, which is why more and more employers are offering the free sessions for their employers. They're like, go get help because we don't want you to come to work and put that drama or trauma or all of that on us at work. And then we also don't want it to impact your productivity levels. So we're now offering all of these great resources so that you can be successful, so that you can be healthy. That's one part of it. But then on the back end, places like the education system, we preach, take care of yourself, take care of yourself. And so we always have encouraged teachers, like, take a mental health day if you need one. So now more and more employers are using that term. More and more people are starting to be, what's the word for it? They're starting to be a little bit more positive towards those that are actively seeking help. And if I'm your employer and you're going out and you're getting help, I know that you're fighting. Like, I know that you're fighting. So I can empathize with you when you come to work and you're having a bad day. Now, I might not say go home because I need you at work, but I might say, hey, come in an hour later and, you know, be sure to go home on time. Or, you know, jobs are starting to be a little bit more lenient towards some of those strict things. And then again, since COVID has happened, it also has allowed more and more companies to say just work from home, which is also helpful.
What about people who maybe don't have insurance and they don't know how they can go about finding help? Are there resources for them as well?
Yeah. So if they do not have a job, let's say they lost their job, but they had a health savings account or they had a flexible spending account. If they have money on there, they can use that for therapy. I always recommend, like, if you have a limited amount, but yet you want to use that for therapy and you want to get as many sessions as possible, find a location that has a sliding scale option and within your budget. So you can shop around when it comes to that. And then also when it comes to having to find services, there are so many organizations who are committed to providing funds for you to get help. So if you do not have insurance, or if you don't have access to an employee assistance program, or whatever the situation is, you can always go to a community center. So like here in Austin, we have Lone Star Circle of Care. We also have Integral Care, and they provide healthcare services for those who don't have insurance, or who, community resources. And if you're a college student and let's say you don't have health insurance, you can always go to the counseling centers on campus. And again, sometimes they have funds to pay for their students to go get counseling sessions. So those are some potential options when it comes to seeking services without any income.
Is there anything else that you want to add just about mental health and seeking help?
Yeah, so one of the things that I will always share is that psychotherapy, mental health services is for everyone. But then I also would like to share that there are so many different options out there, and I'll kind of go into those, but I won't take up too much time. So there is licensed professional counselors, there's licensed clinical social workers, and there's licensed chemical dependency counselors, and marriage and family therapists, and pastoral counseling. We all provide psychotherapy services. The only limitation for LCDCs, or licensed chemical dependency counselors, is that they just solely focus on chemical dependency and substance abuse. And then we focus on the person, we focus on the behavior, we focus on the whole person. And then there's, of course, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, medical doctors, but they offer medication management. They typically don't do psychotherapy or talk therapy, but they more so look at chemical imbalance, and they look at symptoms, physical symptoms. And then you also have psychologists who focus on mostly assessments, but I know a lot of psychologists that actually do psychotherapy in addition to assessments. And again, we can all kind of do assessments, so we all do it, but that's more specifically their specialty, because they go to college to be able to do some of the interpretive exams. And then there's life coaches, although they don't necessarily fall under a licensing board. They can support those who kind of want to sort out their life, but don't want to go the traditional counseling or therapy route. So everybody on this side of the umbrella can typically take insurance and can typically support you using your health resources. And then life coaches is usually straight cash. They usually only accept cash payments, but they are more direct. Us over here, we support you, we give you tools, we do all that. And sometimes we provide direct support, or we're more direct in our therapeutic technique. But then over here, it's like they're giving you an outline, they're giving you a guide. And again, we do that, but we also do additional things like provide perspective. We provide resources and data and all the good stuff. So you have a world of options. It's just a matter of figuring out what it is that you need and what it is you're looking for.
Just in thinking about the conversation around mental health, a lot of people, when they have a physical ailment, they go to a doctor. When they have something like a cold or the flu, they go to the doctor. But with mental health, it's sometimes viewed very differently, maybe because it's not something that people can see sometimes. So I think that contributes to the stigma. But it's very important to put your mental health first, just as you would any sort of physical ailment, right?
For sure. I will say, usually the mind will go first and the body will follow. So usually if let's say I am struggling with low self-esteem, let's say that's my struggle. That could be considered something that you would seek psychotherapy for. So if you don't fix the issues with let's say it's your physical low self-esteem, maybe you feel overweight or something like that, what will happen is your behaviors following that could potentially impact your physical. So what we typically see in situations where people struggle with low self-esteem about their weight or the way that they look is they start to deprive themselves of food. And so then they go into this place of nutritional deficiencies, or they go into this place of, their body is going through so many different changes to where, again, it's the mental thing that's causing these changes, or the mental and behavior things that's causing these changes. And then there's also instances where People are just going to work and they're coming home sick, and they cannot figure out for the life of them why they're sick every day through the week. And then on the weekends, they feel as healthy as possible. That stress at work it's causing an impact on your body. And so it's really, really important to like put your life into perspective and put the different pieces of your world that's causing these traumas or that's causing you to feel a certain feeling or emotion. And once you have the perspective of like what's really causing all this stress on your body, then you can change it and fix it and you will see a difference. And again, I'm not saying it's to replace medicine in any way, but what I am saying is like therapy is meant to figure it out. Like what is causing the stress? What's causing your hands to shake every time you walk out the door? I've seen people go to the doctor thinking that they're having a heart attack, and in actuality, it's a panic attack. And so a lot of people don't realize that your mental status can definitely impact your physical status.
For more information on Crave Counseling, please visit their website at cravecounselingpllc.com. Asha also mentioned a few other resources. You can find Lone Star Circle of Care at lonestarcares.org, and you can find Integral Care at integralcare.org. For suicide prevention, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. And if you are dealing with a life-threatening emergency, please dial 911.
Hi, I'm Dr. Effiog, and I wanted to just talk to you today on this episode of Brain Power about how gratitude really affects our brains. I mean, not just your mood, not just how you think, but really, how does gratitude and the power of gratitude, how it affects how our brains function, the physical health of our brains. Did you know that when you have a feeling of gratitude, when you're thankful, in spite of what's going on in your life and around you, that it releases neurotransmitters in your brain that trigger this feeling of well-being and happiness. And by doing that, it also leads you to make better decisions. It helps you think better about things. And you know what else? You make better decisions about the health of your body and the things around you, and you're able to see things from a better perspective and realize that there is nothing that you cannot think through, right? Because your mind is in a better place and position to think. And so I just wanted to encourage you today. Yes, there are lots of things going on around us. There's COVID, there's lots of increase in anxiety in both children and parents. But really, I want to challenge you as an individual, as a family, to find things that you can be grateful for. Point out things that you're specifically thankful for or appreciative of in the people around you, in your friends, in your family. And you'll be amazed at how much better you feel about yourself and about your situation and what may be going on.